Right, hello everyone. Welcome to the penultimate GPAS seminar of this year. Thank you very much for coming. It's a really great pleasure to introduce Moushumi, Bhowmik and Ben Rogaly today. This is something a bit different for GPAS. It's something a bit more experimental and something that touches on music and politics. So we're very excited about it. So just to say something about the speakers, Moushumi is a singer, writer, and music researcher based in Kolkata. She works in India, Bangladesh, and the UK. Moushumi is one of the most significant artists to emerge from the 1990s in the Bengali folk music movement. And she's also a PhD researcher at Jadavpur University. And her essays have been published in local and international journals in both English and Bengali. Ben is a friend of the school here at Brookes and Professor of Human Geography at the University of Sussex. Ben's work is on kind of geographies of identity, race, place, and migration, amongst other things. And he's published too widely to go into in great detail. But most recently and very excitingly, his book came out with Manchester University Press earlier this year. The book called Stories from a Migrant City, Living and Working Together in the Shadow of Brexit. Okay, so with that, I will happily hand over to Ben and Moushumi.
Well, huge thanks to you, Dan, and to the Global Politics, Economy and Society Research Centre for this invitation to speak, and to everyone else for attending. Moushumi and I are going to divide our talk up into 6 segments, each with some spoken thoughts and some music. So this is exploratory, as you said. It's part of an ongoing conversation between the two of us, though we've never presented together before. We take the concept of racial nationalism, which is in our title, from works such as Siva Mohan Baluvan's The Clamour of Nationalism, and Daniel Geary, Camilla Schofield, and Jennifer Sutton's Global White Nationalism from Apartheid to Trump. Racial nationalism is not confined to the far right, but has also come to characterize much so-called mainstream media and politics in the context we discuss. Our conversation stretches widely over time and space. In the background are the contemporary racial nationalist regimes in India and the UK. They're coming to power on top of what Wendy Brown calls the ruins of neoliberalism, and their interconnectedness with each other and with regimes elsewhere, including the US and Israel. This context makes for strategic urgency in responding with transnational solidarities from below. In the wake of recent defeats for anti-imperialist mainstream party politics in the UK and US, we argue that music can be and has been a crucial medium of building such solidarities. In this first segment, I'm going to speak about how the conversation started and the form it has taken over time. So we met on the 29th of June 2016 in the India of Narendra Modi's first term, 6 days after the UK's narrow majority vote for Brexit. Both countries had experienced decades of neoliberalism. The majority vote for the UK to leave the EU, a narrow one in Wales and a far heftier one in England outside London, and Modi's rise, represented, among other things, a consolidation of the power of racial nationalism in both contexts. My first awareness of Moushumi's work came through listening to her perform as the evening entertainment in a huge hotel banqueting hall at the end of a long day at the International Oral History Association conference in Bengaluru. I was feeling emotionally shattered by the referendum result, which was very fresh. Because of the tenor of the Leave campaign, it seemed to strike a blow for nationalism and for purity, for white supremacy, and against everyday multiculture. This cut me to the core as the multiple heritage son of a secular Jewish father, an immigrant from South Africa to the UK, and a Christian mother, married to a Sikh Punjabi woman, with multiple heritage children of the generation referred to as millennial, one of whom had accompanied me to the conference to volunteer alongside other students. Mixture and internationalism are part of my DNA. To borrow from a recent Bob Dylan song, Moushumi's performance that night contained multitudes. She drew on her vast archive of recordings from the West Bengal and Bangladeshi countryside, songs of immense power that overflowed the enormous venue, sung by artists who had never received any acclaim. The Bengali language was a connection for me because, although presenting on my more recent UK research at the conference, my PhD research had been conducted in Bengal. I had studied Bengali at SOAS and lived in West Bengal for a number of years. Then when Moushumi herself sang, her voice, the Bengali lyrics and themes of the songs sliced me open. Both Bari Kothai and Joshua Road were like knives, accentuating the split I felt over the Brexit result and what it meant for the future. Joshua Road evokes a line of hungry refugees, some of them near death, moving from East Pakistan to Kolkata in India during and after the 1971 War of Liberation in Bangladesh. The allusions to Kolkata connected with my life there in the late 1980s and 1990s, with friends, and with the anti-colonial education that living in Bengal had provided. Moushumi also played a recording of the Asian Dub Foundation, talking with each other in a rehearsal studio, the unmistakable sound of London's multiculture, and the entanglement, familiar to me from growing up in that city, of multiculture with everyday and more violent racisms. This same multiculture was being threatened by the forces represented by the Leave campaign, now victorious after the referendum. Talking afterwards, and on a visit with my son to Moushumi's flat in Kolkata, I learned that she herself has a millennial son who is based in London and that she is often there. I later got involved in organising 3 of her performances in Brighton and London. Moushumi's repertoire continued to move me in ways that I could not yet articulate. The song Bari Kothai, Where is Home, touched me particularly, connecting with my own search for a vision of a political, economic and social transformation away from the dominant racial nationalist politics and the ongoing violence of neoliberalism. We have kept regularly in touch, sharing the ups and downs of each other's family lives and an opposition to what seemed to both of us a growing fascist politics worldwide and its joined upness. Moushumi, I think over to you now.
So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Dan. Ben is, as you can understand, Ben has actually been instrumental in, making me do many things over the last 5 years, and this is one of, in continuity of that. So, so we could start with the song Bari Kothai actually. So what the song Bari Kothai is what really connected us. And it's a song that I wrote in around 1999, 2000. And that's when I had gone to, I was living in London then. So this is around, I went to London in 1998 for with my family. And then around 2000, 2001, I wrote this song. And then, but when I'm singing it, when Ben is hearing it, it's in 2016. So actually 16 years have gone by in between. And things have changed. Actually, the song has changed. And in some ways, everything about the song is the same, yet everything about it is different. And even my own experience of my understanding of what Bari is, what home is, and my search for home, it has, all of that has essentially changed in the meantime. So, the song goes like this. So, where is home? When the lights turned green and I was crossing the road, I found these words lying by the wayside. Where is home? They shadow me now and circle my head through poetry and song, flowing with the wind. Where is home? When the lights turned green and you were coming from across, I saw the words etched on your face, in your eyes. Where is home? Now the thing is, this you, who am I talking to? The you has changed because my world has grown. So perhaps I was talking to myself when I was writing this song. But over the years, as my world has grown, the you to whom I'm asking this question is changing. And so when I say, oh, city so vast of traffic and crowds, the words like waves come crashing on your shores, where is home? In the shower of light, the glimmer of your sands, and you can see I'm seeing a big city now, a shiny city, a new city to me, and that is why I'm asking these questions. In the shower of light, the glimmer of your sands, the words now glow, now dim and glow, where is home? They speed on your roads with the rush of cars, halt at crossings, turn, then run, where is home? In the quiet of your room, in the corner of your sleep, the words come and rest on the spread of your mat. Where is home? This morning, after a wakeful night, O city, they ring in your play of words. Where is home? The words, those words, I hear on and on as I blend into crowds of faces, white and black. Now, this is where Brexit actually comes in, so when I sang it in 2016, and I'm saying we had blended by then in 16 years, even I had blended into this new life. And suddenly there was a halt to that. And I knew that there was a halt to the blending that is being, foretold in this through this referendum, through the laws, through the fortressing of the marking of our territories. So therefore, when I sing, "Oh, masto bado shohor, tomar manush phire, traffic তীরে, শব্দ এসে আছড়ে পড়ে, বাড়ি কোথায়? তোমার বিজ্ঞাপনে আলোর স্নানে, শব্দ শুধু জলে নেভে, বাড়ি কোথায়? তোমার গাড়ির তোড়ে পথের মোড়ে, শব্দ যেন ছুটে বেড়ায়, বাড়ি কোথায়? তোমার আপন মনে ঘুমের কোণে, আসন পেতে শব্দ বসে, বাড়ি কোথায়?" I wrote this song, but it was released it became part of an album 16 years later. So it took all this time for the song to actually find a kind of voice or a platform. I'd sung it in many places, but never really released as an album. But when I was releasing this album, by then things have changed. So there's a book that comes with the album, in which I write, what is this home that we are talking about, and where is it? In these songs, as in my work of all these years, including our work of the Traveling Archive, this is a key question that I've been grappling with. Perhaps because of my personal history, and our collective history is one of being uprooted or of engaging in acts of uprooting. In Badi Kothai, the question plays in a loop. Where is home? Badi Kothai, Badi Kothai, Badi Kothai, Badi Kothai, Badi Kothai. So it keeps coming back. Eki shabdo, eki shabdo, eki shabdo shunte pachi. So I hear the same words again and again. It is not just a question of where now. Where is home? It's no longer a question of where. But the question has changed now, and it's become, what is home? Badi kake boli? What do I call my home? And I think gradually, even after in the 5 years since I met Ben, I think this has become the key question for so many of us. That the question of what is home then? What is it? It's almost like earlier we knew what we could dream of. Now we no longer know. We no longer know what we could aspire, what our destination could be, where the migrant will want to reach, what shores. We no longer seem to know anymore. And that seems to be the critical question that I'm not really a topical songwriter or anything, so again, quoting Dylan. So I'm really not one, but I think the song itself the songs lend themselves to the politics of this time, and we just can't help it in so many ways. So I think I'll just take this a little bit further and then, ask Ben to take over again. And if we think about this time now, and the question of this time and the place of music, and so the question of home again. So last year in 2016, it was the first, I think it was the second year of the first term of the Modi government. And now we are in the second term and things have come to stay. Things are, I mean, we don't even feel fear anymore because, it's almost like there's a numbness. And in this situation, in this context, it started with Kashmir, as you know. And in the context of Kashmir, if you're thinking of songs, and what are songs then? What becomes a song? So anybody who's familiar with the situation in Kashmir, and this happened in August, it happened in August 2019, soon after they came to power. The first thing that happened was, it happened with the abrogation of the special status to Kashmir, so Article 370. And then Kashmir, the Kashmir became the national and the international thing. And it became not just a political thing, it also became a sound. It traveled as a sound to us. So how did it travel? So the way it traveled to us is it came as a slogan. So it came as a slogan, which is the Azadi slogan. And anybody who is kind of a little bit familiar with the politics of India and the politics of the current politics of the sounds of the politics of India, the political sounds of India, will probably know these slogans, So everybody on the streets, even across, in Bengal, we are all giving this Azadi slogan. So Azadi, which means freedom. So what are we saying? We're saying, so, hum kya chahte hai? Azadi. बच्चे चाहते हैं आजादी, औरत मांगे आजादी, हम लेके रहेंगे आजादी, है प्यारा हमारा आजादी. So this is the everybody was, one person will say हम लेके रहेंगे and everyone will say आजादी. So it's like a song. And then of course a lot of the incarceration, a lot of the sort of hounding of political activists that has happened around this one word of Azadi. So they keep going to people and saying, so you were saying Azadi, were you? What is this freedom that you want? What is this? It's a free country. What do you want freedom from? Then why don't you go to Pakistan? So it becomes, the question of what is freedom then? What is this freedom? The interesting thing is this slogan, Azadi, this Azadi slogan actually does not come from Kashmir, although it's been associated with Kashmir. The slogan does not come from Kashmir. Actually, it comes from, very interestingly, Kamla Bhasin, the feminist poet, scholar, and she talks about 1984 in Pakistan. Actually, it originates from a feminist meeting. And it originates from a feminist meeting because it was the time of Ziaul Haq. And it was the time of extreme repression of women. And then the women actually came up with this slogan because they were not allowed to. So they said, all right, we'll have a mela. We'll just have a gathering where outside they sold bangles and they had shops and stuff. And then inside they were having these like real serious theoretical and political discussions. And there they began to raise the slogan, and there they said, Aurat mange azadi. So women want azadi. Aurat mange azadi. Bachcho ka nara azadi. Hum leke rahenge azadi. Hai pyara nara azadi. From patriarchy. So then Kamla Bhasin goes into English, she says, from patriarchy, azadi. From all hierarchy, azadi. From endless violence, azadi. From helpless silence, azadi. Yet this becomes the slogan of the Muslim, of the Islamists. It becomes identified with Islamic terrorism. It becomes this azadi slogan, the complete universality of it, the sound of it, gets sort of, reduced to it being a slogan just of the Kashmiri separatists. So in this context, let us listen to one song, and which is a song sung by this beautiful young activist, singer, poet. His name is Amir Aziz. And I think what we need to understand is, and actually the slogan Azadi actually goes further back. The slogan Azadi goes further back in the sense that there is a song from the 1940s, an IPTA song, which was written by, which was an IPTA song, Indian People's Theatre Association song, which was written by Maqbool Muhyiddin, which had these lines, so, ye jang hai azadi, azadi ke hum ke chale. So it was one of our listeners now is Sumangala Damodaran, and I think she is a singer and she has sung this song as well. So so this became an iconic sort of battle cry, the Azadi thing. And from there, so how a cry sort of shifts, changes meaning, and becomes associated with a call, a sound becomes associated with a certain people. So when Amir is singing this song, he's singing the ballad of Pehlu Khan. So there's been all these lynchings around the whole question of cow protection and cow slaughter in India. So Amir writes this song. But I think now Amir is actually making a different claim to the word Azadi. A secular poet like Amir, a radical left poet like Amir, is having to say, look, I'm a Muslim. Yes, that's what I am. And listen to me. And this is the ballad of Pehlu Khan.
पहलू खान बेचारे एक इंसान थे, उम्र 55 रहने वाले हिंदुस्तान के। एक दिन एक भीड़ के हाथों नोच नोच खाए गए, मेले से खरीद कर गाय थे लाने गए। पहलू पेशे से डेयरी किसान थे, बस खता इतनी सी थी कि यहीं पैदा हुए। मुसलमान थे। लोग अनगिनत मौके पे तब मौजूद थे, कुछ वीडियो बनाने में पर मशगूल थे। कुछ डर गए, कुछ और अनदेखा किए, कुछ खुश हुए, कुछ नालतें भेजा की, और बाकियों को कत्ल ये मकबूल था। एक तो लोग थे लोगों से दुखी, खुद से भी परेशान थे।
So I think with Amir's song, or there's another of our friends who is also listening here, and she is a painter, Labuni, and they're all by birth, they're Muslims. And I think the anxiety of the Muslim or the minority, and the whole question of, we've had all these new citizenship acts, the new register for citizenship, and therefore the anxiety is one of, there's extreme anxiety here. And the whole question is one which is saying, Bari, we are no longer thinking about Bari, we are no longer thinking about home. What we are thinking about is, are we going to be thrown out now? Are we going to be sent to detention camps? Are we going to be packed in trains? And like people were sent to Auschwitz and Treblinka, are we going to be sent like that? That is, I think, it is not an unreal and it's not an overblown and exaggerated anxiety anymore. It is a real thing. It's something that we're holding in our hands. And I think we could move to something from here, Ben.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about Yiddish music. And I want to start by saying that it's not surprising to me that Bernie Sanders' politics has been described as Yiddish socialism, nor that both he and the late anarchist activist and intellectual David Graeber refer to their working class secular Jewish roots in New York. In October 2018, after Moushumi and I had been in conversation for over 2 years, a Muslim friend of mine, Muzammil Hussain, introduced me to a secular Yiddish choir. At the very first rehearsal I attended, I was immediately struck by the warmth and curiosity of fellow choir members. For once, I didn't feel like an outsider because of my Jewishness. Instead, I felt I might not be Jewish enough. The director of the choir soon reassured me. When speaking to her on the stairs, I mentioned that my late father had been Jewish. She said she had a Jewish father too. As I learned later, being Jewish was not a prerequisite for being in the choir. I haven't looked back since. At the first rehearsal, we sang the song Alla Brida, All Brothers, which sang in very upbeat terms about both brotherhood and sisterhood. I imagined this not as diasporic Jewish nationalism, but as universal emancipatory humanism. The song is based on a late 19th century poem, Achtes, by London-based socialist Maurice Winchevsky, which, as historian Vivi Lax has explained, was actually a satirical take on the absurdity of the idea of unity between assimilated and better off Jews on the one hand, and newly arrived Yiddish-speaking working class Jews on the other. But I was excited by the sound of the choir singing Alla Brida, the joy and humor of the song, referring to loving each other like a groom with a bride, via chosa mit hakala, the way it seemed to lift the whole choir while singing it, the Yiddish names Rochel and Esther that brought to mind one of my sisters and my niece. And alongside this, there was a sing-along feeling to its oi 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 sections and an explanation at the top of the song sheet that spoke of socialism. This was the time of Jeremy Corbyn's socialist leadership of the UK Labour Party, a politics I supported, and yet one which was being portrayed by elements of the media as problematic for Jews due to a prevalence of anti-Semitism on the left and a reluctance on the part of the Labour Party to deal with it speedily or effectively. In common with many other leftist people of Jewish descent, I was fascinated and inspired by the connection of Yiddish music with a universal internationalist politics of emancipation against capitalist exploitation and against fascism and all racisms. This connection is not made explicitly or in the same way by the choir, where a range of political perspectives may be present and the focus is on the singing. But for me, certain songs recorded and performed and changed across time offered palpable, visceral connection to a politics of liberation. My Jewish ancestors had been part of migrations from the Tsarist Empire, where state-led anti-Jewish pogroms had been commonplace. Some of the songs emerged from such roots, while others became widely used in strikes for better working conditions by migrant garment workers in New York in the early 20th century. As historian Daniel Katz tells us, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union was founded in New York in 1900. Many Jewish garment workers also belonged to workmen's circle groups founded by anti-capitalist Jews in New York a few years earlier. The labor militancy that followed in the 1900s was energized and enabled by the experience of recently arrived young men and women who, in Katz's words, cut their political teeth on organizing in Russia. The 1905 generation, referring to the failed revolution of that year, injected their energies, their socialist ideas, and their militant zeal into the political and cultural organizations of working class immigrant Jews. Katz goes on to describe how, following an attempt by garment manufacturers to intimidate workers through hiring violent thugs, one union activist, Clara Lemlich, called for a general strike, and there was an overwhelming response. Alliances were formed with Black, Irish, and Italian workers. The Cosmopolitan Club, an interracial group of socialists meeting in a Black church in Brooklyn, voted to endorse the strike. The political education program unrolled by the ILGWU included celebratory dancing and protest songs. Poet Morris Rosenfeld wrote a series of poems in Yiddish, about the working conditions of textile workers in early 20th century New York. One, Mein Ruheplatz, My Resting Place, was put to music and became a protest anthem. According to Austrian Yiddish singer Isabel Frey, it was sung at the commemoration in 1911 of the deaths of 146 women in a fire at the non-unionized Triangle Shirtwaist factory, where the doors had been locked to prevent workers from taking breaks, and many women jumped to their deaths from the roof. Here is a recording made last month of Isabel Frey singing Mein Ruheplatz from her recently released album Millennial Bundist, and I put the lyrics and translation into the chat.
Niet zoek mich wo die Myrten gerieben, gefind's mich dort nicht, mein Schatz, wo Lebenswelten bei Maschinen, dort ist mein Ruheplatz, dort ist mein Ruheplatz. Nicht such mich, wo die Vögel singen, gefindst mich dort nicht, mein Schatz. Als Sklav bin ich, wo Ketten klingen, dort ist mein Ruheplatz, dort ist mein Ruheplatz. Nicht such mich, wo Fontanen spritzen, gefindst mich dort nicht, mein Schatz, wo Tränen rinnen, Zähne kritzeln, dort ist mein Ruheplatz, dort ist mein Ruheplatz.
Moushumi.
So with the garment workers, you know, when you talk about the garment workers, and there's such a connection. I mean, firstly, because like Ben said in the beginning, I've been working for the last almost 25 years. I've been working across places. So I've been working in Bangladesh and in India and in the UK for almost over 20 years now. So I live between places. So Bangladesh is as much my home as any other places. So anything that happens there happens to me. So in 2012 and 13, there were two major accidents, really not accidents, you know, there was a slaughtering of, what do you call it? Institutional murder, I think, of garment workers. One in a fire in Tazreen fashions. And of course, Bangladesh is always supporting a lot of, you know, to the garment industry across the world, to all the big fashion houses, they're supporting ready-made clothes. So there was an accident in Tazreen fashion, and then there was the big building collapse in Rana Plaza in 2013, and over 1,000 workers died. They were trapped to their death. And so this whole thing of the international thing of protest and the international thing of oppression, I mean, they just go hand in hand, you know. So just as protest, I mean, our songs of protest can travel from place to place, and repression has been traveling from place to place. And the ways of repressing people, I mean, people are learning, one is learning from the other, really. We are mirroring each other now. And so what happened during this lockdown is one thing which again connects to the garment workers, because we had in India, we had this whole, you had these, and everybody's seen these images of thousands and thousands of workers going from, going back home, walking back home. But as soon as, within a few hours, the Prime Minister announced that there was everything was going to be taken off the roads. And so there'd be no transport, nothing. And so people were just started to walk because they had lost their jobs, they had nowhere to stay, and they felt so insecure. So again, they're trying to go home, bari, they were trying to reach their home. And so there were all these thousands and thousands, people died on the streets. In Bangladesh, they said that the garment industry would be open. So what they did was people started to walk back to Dhaka. They started to walk back, and then they said, no, you cannot have the garment industry. The factories can't be open because it's for safety, health and safety reasons. So then once they reached Dhaka, they said, no, you have to go back now. So it's like people are just pawns, ordinary people, and their lives are just, people are playing games with our lives. But there was a different kind of marching that was happening in our part of the world, especially in India. From December onwards, around the Citizenship Act and the laws, and there was a huge protest that was building up in India. And there were people marching on the streets, and there were songs, and really the streets swelled with song. They were so beautiful, everywhere there were songs. And we were actually borrowing songs. So Bella Ciao was a song that everyone was singing, and they were making Bengali versions of Bella Ciao. And so, of course, the standard songs are always sung. So things like We Shall Overcome and things like that are always sung. But there was something else that was happening. Now, one of the songs which we were singing a lot, and it's not like a new song, but an old song that's been made into something new. And what is this song? It is actually our national anthem. It is interesting because everything is around the whole question of nation. Everything is around, the flag is beginning to have new meaning. Even for us, we couldn't be bothered earlier, with the tricolor. We would never even bother to touch it. But then suddenly the flag is something that we needed to reclaim almost. We needed to reclaim the national anthem now, because we needed to say, look, this is my land too. And you can't throw anybody out. So this is the kind of spirit in which the anthem was being sung. Now there's the politics of the anthem that I want to talk about. The anthem was being sung, but people were reading the Constitution, they were singing the Constitution. There were thousands of people reading the Constitution because everything that was happening was anti-constitutional. So the new song was this Constitution was the new song, we the people, So that the pledge, the constitutional pledge, the preamble of the Constitution was being read. Similarly, the national anthem was being sung. Now, the national anthem was also being intellectualized, and people, new intellectuals, new singers, and politically, more acutely active singers like T.M. Krishna, the Carnatic vocalist. He actually began to sing the national anthem in a very different way. So he began to the national anthem, our national anthem, is written by Rabindranath Tagore, the Bengali poet. And so that national anthem is very much about a sort of the glory of the state, the way the verses, it's a long song, but the section that is sung as the anthem is really, it ends with, the salvation of all people in thy land, thou dispenser of India's destiny, victory, victory, victory to thee. So, Jayo He, Jayo He, Jayo He. So that's the way it goes, So it's a very sort of jubilant, celebratory song. But the verses that T.M. Krishna began to sing are the unsung verses of the national anthem. And for us, this became a song of protest. how did it become a song? So this is no longer celebratory. It is almost a song of mourning now. So the way we are singing it now is we're singing very different verses. We're singing this verse, which is about in the darkest night, in the sick and senseless nation, your watchful eyes are ever awake, filled with resolute goodness. That is the kind of line that is being sung now. That is the lines that are being sung now are about the inclusiveness, because the national anthem that we sing is mostly names places. It's a list of places that are part of India. So it's about Punjab, Sindhu, Gujarat, Maratha, Dravid, Utkal, Bongo. So it's the list of all the places. And then the people in the Northeast say, where is the Northeast? And so they say, oh, the national anthem doesn't include the Northeast. And so there's also those kinds of politics. But here, the people are almost absent, I feel. But the people are there in that song. Actually, they are there, in the unsung verses. So your call is broadcast constantly. We hear your generous words. Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis, Muslims, and Christians. So here, everybody is being included. So when T.M. Krishna sings it, he sings, Ahu rahu tabu abhano pracharito shuni tabu udaro bani Hindu Buddha Sikh Jaino Parashik Musalmano Krishtani. And in a very famous performance, T.M. Krishna starts singing this song. He sings the lines, Hindu Buddha Sikh Jaino Parashik, and he stops. And even I am actually cracking up as I'm saying these words, because what he's singing a tragedy, because what he's singing is actually the exclusion of people. He's not singing the inclusion. In singing the inclusion, he's actually talking about the exclusion, the leaving out of people that is happening. But here we have problems. So he does not sing the joy of it. And when we were out on the streets, we were also singing like Ghoroti miro ghano nibido nishite Pidito murchito deshe Jagroto chilo tabo Abhichalo mangalo nato nayone Animeshe Dushapne ratonke Rokha korile onke. So mother, you held me in your lap. But we don't sing Jayo He. We don't sing those lines every time we're out on the streets, because we are actually protesting by not singing the Jayo He lines. But I just want to end this bit by talking about one thing. And Ben, if you could show that image now. These are two paintings by our friend Labuni. She is a young researcher, and so you see this image. If you could, yeah. So this image, these three people. There were 5 young men who were. This happened during the riots in Delhi on 24th February. And during these riots, this was basically a pogrom against the Muslims. And so they went, and because there's been all these protests, and so they were gathering up the hounding the protesters. They were beating them. They've beaten these people to pulp, really, And then the police actually were instrumental in doing this, and they were poking them and pushing them and asking them to sing the national anthem. So there are videos which went. Now there is no. There's a different kind of, there's a submission in that singing of the national anthem. We were singing the song as a song of protest. They are singing the song as a way of survival. They need to somehow be able to, just in case the police let them go. That's why they were singing, these men, and one of them actually died singing. They were all bleeding and they were singing the national anthem. So they were singing the Joy of Hay line, they were singing every line then. And so, yeah, Ben.
Do you want to say something about this one as well?
Yeah, okay. So this is Laboni's image of protest, because what they did was, this was a mosque and they took down the mosque, the crescent moon. They went and they were trying to demolish the mosque in one of those ravaged, riot-hit places. And so there was somebody who actually went up, one of the protesters went up and put up the Indian flag. And Laboni wants to believe that somebody also went with the red flag. And maybe you could go from here, from the red flag, Ben.
Okay, fine. So I'm going to move to another context, but hopefully you'll see the link. Following the brutal murder of George Floyd in May this year, there's been a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in the US and in many other countries. Music and song have played important parts in this. As W.E.B. Du Bois emphasizes in his 1903 classic, The Souls of Black Folk, music of Black liberation evolved through the experience of slavery and the memory of that experience. What he refers to as sorrow songs are precursors to the work of Paul Robeson, who was directly connected to slavery through his father's life story. As Moushumi has described, one thing that animates our conversation is the metaphor offered by the known history of Nazi genocide in the context of contemporary India and other countries. Music as a tool in the struggle against the depredations of capitalism and against fascist politics seems to us even more important at a time when people were voting in large numbers, e.g. in India and the US, for policies that produced and reproduced differentiation between some humans as humans and others as less than that. Wordy oppositional statements seem not to be able to counter the slick messaging of racial nationalist-controlled social media operations, nor, in the case of the UK at least, the mainly right-wing legacy print media. People were not persuaded in sufficient numbers to vote for the left-led Labour Party's anti-imperialist politics in the UK last December. Many more voted instead for the bare-bones nationalism placed on offer by the Conservatives. In reflecting on the defeat soon afterwards, Socialist and then Shadow Finance Minister John McDonnell remarked that a range of different means were needed, including music, to have a chance of recapturing people's imaginations with hopeful universalist messages about the potential for a better world. Contemporary Yiddish revival artists like Daniel Kahn, Jeff Berner, and Isabel Frey have made explicit links between Yiddish socialist music and lyrics developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, on the one hand, and on the other, the struggles of racialized people, particularly people of African descent, and recently arrived migrants and refugees. All these have sought to unite struggles against, all these singers have sought to unite struggles against racism without creating a hierarchy of racisms. After Du Bois visited the Warsaw Ghetto following its destruction, he published an article in the journal Jewish Life entitled The Negro and the Warsaw Ghetto, describing how the experience had totally changed the way he thought about race and racism. The problem of slavery, emancipation, and caste, wrote Du Bois, was no longer in my mind a separate and unique thing as I had so long conceived it. It was no longer even solely a matter of color and physical and racial characteristics, which was a particularly hard thing for me to learn, since for a lifetime, the color line had been a real and efficient cause of misery. No, the race problem reached all sorts of people and caused endless evil to all men. The ghetto of Warsaw helped me to emerge out of a certain social provincialism into a broad conception of what the fight against race segregation, religious discrimination, and the oppression by wealth had to become. End of quote. For me, this points to a universal internationalist politics, which in contemporary times also means solidarity with struggles for Palestinian liberation. Historian Robin Kelly has pointed to a period of solidarity in the late 1960s and early 1970s between Black struggles in the US and the Palestinian struggle, a solidarity that has also been articulated in the writings of Angela Davis. Although the weekly Yiddish choir rehearsals were not sites for explicitly political discussion, in February 2020, the time that Moushumi was referring to in relation to the Delhi pogroms, I asked if I could read out the translation of a poem by Amir Aziz, which I had been made aware of by Moushumi. The poem, Sab Yaad Rakha Jayega, Everything Will Be Remembered, while detailing anti-Muslim state violence, seemed to me to be evocative of anti-Jewish state violence in late 19th century Russia and the organized violence against Jews organized by the Nazi regime in Germany in the 1930s. The notion inherent in the title of the poem, that everything will be remembered, chimed for me with the powerful Yiddish song we were rehearsing at the time, Sag nit keinmal as du gehst dem letzten Weg, never say that you are walking the final road. The lyrics to Sag nit keinmal were written in 1943 by Hirsch Glick, a resident of the Vilna ghetto, inspired by news of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising the same year. They were set to the music of a pre-existing Soviet song. This is a song of resistance. Its refrain, Mir seinen do, we are here, resonates with Sab Yaad Rakha Jayega. Sag nit keinmal was adopted by Jewish partisan groups as a marching song and became well known after World War II. It's often used to commemorate Jewish resistance to oppression. But importantly for our discussion today, it was famously sung in Yiddish by Paul Robeson at Tchaikovsky Hall in Moscow in 1949 and broadcast live across the USSR. Robeson is understood to have performed the song as a critique of the Soviet regime for its ongoing purge of Jews. Because the performance was by Robeson, this can be seen as bringing together emancipatory struggles against US racism, the fascism of Nazi Germany, and ongoing European colonialism. For me, singing Sag nit keinmal last February had particular power and meaning in the present. It connected to the need to stiffen resolve to fight back against the racist and fascist politics that were practiced by the new UK Conservative government that had just been elected. It was hard to have hope following the defeat of the explicitly socialist, internationalist and anti-racist Labour manifesto. Sag nit keinmal offered that in part because of the strident marching tune of the song, and in part because being in Yiddish and having been written in a Nazi ghetto, it evoked a much more urgent struggle, a determination to continue to achieve liberation, even when faced with overwhelming force. And some people did indeed survive, though not Glick. I'm going to play you a short clip from Robeson singing Sag nit keinmal, and the translation and the lyrics are in the chat.
Песни еврейского гетто, оккупированной немцами Варшавы.
Keinmal als du gehst dem letzten Wege, den Himmel bleien verstellen neue Dinge, weil kommen wird noch unser Eus Gebete schon, uns wird erbeugt an unser Trott mir sein in Klo, weil kommen wird noch unser Eus Gebete schon, uns wird erbeugt an unser Trott mir sein in Klo. Palmenland bis Weidenland wird Schnee. Wir seien da mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wenn gefallen ist spritzt von unser Blut, wird noch sprotzt von unser Geburt, unser Mut. Und wenn gefallen ist spritzt von unser Blut, wird noch sprotzt von unser Geburt, unser Mut.
Moushumi.
Well, I think we'll try and end on a note of hope, as Ben said, trying to because everything is so dismal anyway. It's so grim, and there's really so it's so hard to hope now. But then this voice of Paul Robeson, and we've been talking the last week, Ben and I, we've been talking, I've been looking through my old records, you know, things from my childhood and old mixtapes, listening to old things. And so we are familiar with the songs of Paul Robeson, and I've been familiar with his songs from my childhood, also because of one of the reasons is, You see, I grew up in the northeast of India. I grew up in a small hill town called Shillong. And it's near Assam. It's just, it used to be part of Assam. So, so there is a voice there, which is a very prominent voice, almost like a Paul Robeson of Assam. So the voice is one of Bhupen Hazarika. And Bhupen Hazarika's songs is something that we have heard from the time we were small children. And there is, Bhupen Hazarika actually translated, he knew many languages. He went to the US to study, and then he met Paul Robeson. Later, when he came back, he became part of the Indian People's Theatre Association. He wrote these protest songs. He was part of the campaign against, against racism, against linguistic repressions, he was part of many movements. It's a shame that later he died some years ago, but before he died, he joined the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, and I don't even know how to explain that, but we will not even get into it, because let us think of his songs and let us think of his voice instead. So he had actually translated Old Man River, and he translated that into Assamese, and he translated that was his main language. Then he translated that was translated by somebody else into Bengali, and there's a Hindi version, there's many versions. But the interesting thing is the river, the name of the river, and I thought we could end with something about the river here. So it's the name of the river, and the Assamese song goes like this, that Bistirno parore, ochongho jonore, hahakar huniu, nikhobde nirobe, buralui tumi, buralui bua kio. So Luit, Lohit, that's the name of the river. Lohit, what is this river? This is the river which is called Sangpo in Tibet. It's called Siang and Diang in Arunachal Pradesh as it comes down. It becomes the Luit in Assam, then becomes the Brahmaputra further down in Assam, enters Bangladesh, becomes the Jamuna, mixes with other rivers, joins the Ganga, joins the Padma, finally reaches the sea. So, like the river, I think, which changes its name according to context, changes its name according to the name that people give to it. I think struggles are also like that. Struggles are also something which flow. And maybe even now, if it seems like things have stopped for a bit, I don't believe that, the river of struggle has actually stopped. And I do not think that, I think we will, the Buraluit, the old river, will continue to flow, as long as there is life on earth. I think it will, even after it, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really exciting. Okay, guys, we've got plenty of time for questions if people have them. We've already had a thank you and a goodbye from Tom Chambers, who had to leave, unfortunately. If anybody has questions, can you just indicate that you've got a question in the chat function, and we can then come to you in turn. Just while we wait for a question to come in, I thought I might use the opportunity as chair to do that, to ask the first question. So I was interested, both of you seem to be kind of drawing links between solidarity, protest, music and place, right? And I wondered, especially for Moushumi, whether there's a kind of strategic essentialism going on, especially in your use of the singing of the Constitution. And I wondered whether that came through for Ben as well, and whether I didn't detect it as strongly for Ben, but whether there's an importance to strategic essentialism in those solidarity building through song.
Shall I take it, Ben? Yeah. So some of our radical left friends in these marches said, you know, we would say in our political science classes, we would say when we were students, we would say, why are they teaching us the Constitution? Why aren't they teaching us the Communist Manifesto? So that is what the position used to be 30 years ago. Today, for us to actually think that, all right, we need to start from somewhere. We're losing ground like anything. You know, yes, it is strategy. We need to at least look at what we already have and what we are beginning to lose. And I think in that, that's why I said there's a reclaiming. And a reclaiming, which is also for us, it is very important for, I think, people on the lefter side of things. I think it's important that in the sense that we hadn't really thought of these things. We thought that, oh, we could actually afford to be more radical than this, but we can't. Now we've come to a point where, you know, we're just losing the very basic shreds of, you know, a very basic human existence. So we're needing to cling to whatever we have. And I think in the singing, in the flag, in the Constitution, in the national anthem, there is certainly a certain, you know, looking for something, for meaning in them, and also finding meaning. There's a beautiful moment that there was a brilliant political moment which happened when this Dalit activist, Chandrasekhar Azad, they were not allowing congregation. So what he did was during the, at the Jama Masjid in Delhi, so there was this brilliant moment that happened where he stood up, you know, where there was this huge congregation, and then he stood up with the Constitution in his hand, you know, and so that became such an iconic moment, and it was like rising from the dead, really, you know. So that kind of strategy, I think, is happening. Ben?
Yes, I think strategic essentialism is necessary when reactionary forces are trying so hard to keep us divided in various different ways. Yeah. But I won't go on because there are other questions.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, okay, so take a question from Claudia.
Hello there, thank you very much for the really interesting talk. I did write my PhD on how you construct national identity in popular music. So I'm particularly interested in the sense of how you construct an identity which brings people together, but your focus was kind of more on the exclusion, especially on the racial and the religious line. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about like how you think the nations are imagined, and how is it still that we are excluding people on the lines of race and religion. And yeah, on that question, I will leave it there.
Sorry, could you just repeat that a little bit? I got a little bit confused towards the end of the question.
I would just like if you could say a little bit more about the relationship in between nationalism, national identity, and race and religion, because that's what I took away from your talk, that a lot of people do not feel included in certain national ideas.
Yeah. So, Ben, would you like to answer first, and then I can take from you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd like to say, Claudia, thanks so much for coming, and I need to read your thesis or your other publications because, you know, you've been looking at this in such detail. For me, I mean, unlike Moushumi, I'm at the beginning of a journey on this, but I do think it's important to try to understand what brings together some of the nationalisms which have become powerful in certain states in different parts of the world, based around racialization of the nation, or consolidation of a racialization of the nation. And we see this certainly in the UK, and the rise of a certain kind of English nationalism. And we also see it in the politics of Trump, and we see it in Modi, And we also see it in a number of other kind of nation state contexts where race is a defining mode of nationalist politics. But I don't want to go on, partly because I want to read your stuff, partly because Moushumi wants to say something, and also because there may be other questions and I'm conscious of lack of time. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the race and the minorities question is so complex in India. It's just so extremely complex and so layered that at every moment, you know, there can be a claim there is a claim that can be made for each and every unit, and there are too many units that we're talking about here. And India is sometimes it feels, you know, beyond beyond the possibility of bringing everything together, because everybody is articulating some kind of nationalism or some kind of ethnic identity or some kind of racial or caste identity, or and all these identities, the identities and the identity question is so connected with the question of exclusion that it's really difficult. I mean, I don't know, it just makes things very, very difficult here in a country like India. So sometimes we think, you know, we can't connect so much with the rest of India. We sometimes try to think more in terms of Eastern India. We try to think more in terms of in our problems, in our politics. We try to think more in terms of our regions, because there are all these regions which have their own identity and our own nationalisms, which are also very problematic. Because see, where I grew up in Shillong, I mean, we faced this problem every time. All through my growing up, I faced this problem where everywhere we were the outsiders. So because I was a Bengali in Shillong, I was an outsider. In Assam, there is this whole thing between the Bengali and the Assamese. So and then they use all these laws and all these, actually these repressive laws are used in nationalist politics, even by these small groups of people. So it just makes things extremely difficult, I think. So exclusion and further exclusion is what keeps happening, I think.
Thank you. Okay, Gary.
Okay, yeah, and thank you both of you, Moushumi and Ben. I thought that was very thoughtful, and I was thinking about what Moushumi was saying about the national anthem in India and Woody Guthrie's "This Land Is Your Land," which had verses excluded in the version that's most well known. Yeah. But I was also thinking that both of you did mention Bob Dylan, and that was good. But also, I was thinking at the same time about what it is about music that can be political. And Moushumi kind of not only did she kind of deny that she was a protest singer, but she also kind of talked about the expansiveness of the pronouns that she'd experienced. And I think the power of some of Dylan's work is that he uses a pronoun like you, and it both means a lover, an audience, the media, and the political world. And it's very resonant. And I'm thinking about the power of music and that kind of elasticity of meaning and protest, and elasticity of meaning of pronouns and so on is important. On the other hand, it goes both ways. So if you expand the personal to the political, you can do the reverse. And on something like Idiot Wind, which is kind of framed in the context of Watergate, post-Watergate, it becomes quite a kind of lament at a personal level, rather than, as it were, a wholesale confrontation with the politics of the time. Also, in recent years, I've heard Dylan sing things like Blowing in the Wind and Times They Are A-Changing, and the urgency of the music is slowed down. And so it becomes a kind of lament, a mourning lament for a time of optimism and change. And so I think there is evidently a power in music with the elasticity of meaning and the way that the music can kind of change and intonation can change and interpretation can change. But it's by no means a simple one-way victory for the left or for kind of protest against kind of fascism and racism, because the very ambiguity and elasticity of some of the song, of music, can go both ways. I mean, I just wonder what you think the power of music is, and whether it, as it were, is kind of one way, or if it's susceptible of different kinds of emotional charges.
Moushumi, you probably have more to say about that than me, so I might say something short first. That you don't have to say anything, obviously, but you know, the multiplicity of meanings in Dylan's work is a source of endless fascination for me. But you know, there are so many academics who actually study that in depth. I don't know if you're one of them, Gary, but I think what you're saying kind of totally chimes with what we've been thinking and talking about, in the sense of how songs shift in their arrangements, in how they're heard, in the context over time, and they become meaningful for different purposes, for different people. Even when Moushumi was talking about Bari Kotai, she was talking about the different meanings of the songs to her over the last 20 years. And the way I received it was again different. And I remember, you know, I've seen change, like with the Clash and the combination of punk and reggae in Rock Against Racism, and how that became a movement of the left against fascism in the late 70s. And then you see the Clash and, you know, the irony of their line, turning rebellion into money, you know, later on. Yes, absolutely. I would say to you, absolutely. However, I think it's also important to listen to John McDonnell's point about, you know, there was a very dry, wordy manifesto last December, which didn't win people over. And sometimes if you're thinking about this politically, you know, music, if you're thinking about it politically from the left, music could also be something helpful. Sorry, Moushumi, you wanted to say something.
Well, I agree that yes, it goes both ways, you know. So there is that elasticity of meaning, of course, and there's so much is about interpretation, so much is about the context, about the time, and the same song, even to the composer, it begins to, which is why when you say it's gone slower, it's become more like a lament. Something that used to be more like a protest becomes more like a lament. All of that, it's happened to me. It's happened to me, and the songs that I've written and the songs that I sing, and it's also time does that to us. And I think seeing time, seeing what we have been able to do, and what the vast things that we have not been able to do, all of that actually brings in, I think lament comes in so naturally into our perception of our own protest. I think sometimes, you know, we look at it with nostalgia. We sometimes look at protest with nostalgia, sometimes with lament, sometimes with regret. So many ways of looking at the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Neil?
Thank you very much for that. That was a really interesting, really fascinating presentation. So much to think about there. Just to follow briefly something that Gary was saying, I suppose I really agree with him on the point that, you know, we can see these things in Dylan's work, perhaps even more in the work of Phil Oakes and his stuff around William Worthy, for instance, and Joe Hill, for instance, as well. These topics about protest and conversation that's transnational, that's cosmopolitan. And why Dylan's really interesting, I would say these thinkers really make me a lot more. And thinking about this notion of a transcultural, cross-cultural politics, this relationship between singing and different protest movements, that's really interesting. And something I was thinking about, I was at JNU for quite a bit in 2016 when these things were happening. And something that seemed to me quite interesting was the caste angle, people like Rohit Vemula's suicide, for instance, and the relationship between caste and singing. And the localities around this, for instance, in South India with Carnatic music and the caste relationship to that, and Vemula's suicide in Hyderabad, the conversations I think need to be quite located, as I'm sure you'd agree, And the relationship in caste and music in these conversations seems to be quite interesting, particularly in the Indian context. I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, Ben, should I answer? Yeah. So sure, absolutely. And I think when you say Rohit Vemula, and if you think about it, when we're talking about, you know, think of the last letter that he wrote, you know, the letter about stardust. And so what is the protest in it, you know? If you're looking for an idiom of protest, then perhaps there is just a lament, and there is just a dream that is written into that letter. And in his act of killing himself, he makes a final, perhaps a final statement, or puts a final punctuation mark to that letter, you know, in a sense. But but that letter now, if we were to sing it, we could perhaps make it into a song about a protest of somebody from the caste angle, as well as protest from the point of somebody who is where loneliness itself, or isolation, or fragmentation of society, of our inability to actually reach one another. These itself are political conditions, and we protest against that. So we are not only talking about, I don't think we're only talking about here, you know, not only talking about laws and repressive a state, but we are also talking about the system. And the system is many things. It's not just laws. It's also this, the system is also one which isolates, which alienates. Alienation is very political. And I think within that, so somebody who comes from a lower caste will feel a certain kind of alienation in a society, you know, within the same parameters, when there is someone else who comes from an upper caste. So then that alienation becomes political. So this caste and the question of the system, I think the problems are systemic. And so the song, the protest, or the music of protest actually is beyond these, I think, beyond these slogans, I would say. You know, they're beyond slogans. They encompass more than that. I mean, if we think of the woman question, you know, if we think of gender, and then what is a protest song there? You know, what are so many things, like an everyday thing, a mother singing a lullaby can be a protest song as well, you know. So, so many things become expressions of protest, and they also cut across cultures, I think.
Can I ask Neil, what's your second name?
So my internet connection's a bit dodgy, so I keep cutting out. I'm really interested. I just don't want to disappear and lose it. My name's Neil Harris. I'm a lecturer in sociology. Nice
to meet you, Neil. I just wanted to come back with your mention of Joe Hill, because I listened to a wonderful Radio 3 essay earlier this year about Paul Robeson's rendition of the song about the ghost of Joe Hill. And I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night. Yeah. And at the end of the essay, it said to the listener that you know, we might have seen the defeat of some of these internationalist forms of politics, but the ghost of Joe Hill and the ghost of Paul Robeson will keep coming back, and that tells us something and does give me hope.
Okay, thanks. Did you, Ben, want to respond to Barry's question about whether it's possible to narrate the nation through whatever medium fully inclusively? Or actually, Barry, if you're still around, is Barry still around? Yeah, Barry, do you want to ask your question fully?
Thanks, Dan. In fact, Ben did reply. I was just prompted by the notion. I recently I've just completed a book on populism and globalization, in which I draw upon very briefly I think the work of Carl Degler in discussing this question of an inclusive nationality in relation to the United States. And given the very medium that you both privilege in terms of narrating the idea of the nation, whether or not that, to put it brutally, is just a romance, or whether the very idea of narrating the nation pushes one towards some form of exclusivity or exclusiveness.
Moushumi, have you gone?
No, I'm here. I just had my computer was running out of charge. I'm here. Yeah. Sorry.
Do you want to talk about this?
No,
question?
you will. Can you do that? Because I was trying to plug in my computer.
No problem at all. I think, again, it's a question of I need to read your book, Barry, and think about this more. I mean, this is a widely discussed topic among friends who are political theorists and people who are not friends, who I've come across as a kind of like an academic acquaintance. But it's not an area where I feel I'm qualified to really give you a properly informed answer. I had this same discussion with Siva Mohan Valuvan. I don't know if you know his book, The Clamour of Nationalism, which was published a year ago by MUP and it's just come out in paperback. But I was talking to him and Gargi Bhattacharya at the launch of his book in February. And I was kind of raising how, in my experience of certain kinds of activism that sometimes, say in anti-colonial movements, certain kinds of nationalism might temporarily offer a progressive way forward. It was him who was one of the people who pointed me to the work of Adam Getachew and this idea of world making. And this is a kind of non-nationalist approach, which was also connects with the discussion that I referred to of the kind of Robin Kelly's work on Black Palestinian political alliances in the late 60s and early 70s, where there were elements of the Palestinian movement which were not about nationalism, but more kind of inspiring world making in the notion of Adam Getachew. But this is stuff which I'm not on top of this stuff. I just think it's these questions are so important to how we think politically as well as academically, and I certainly will read your work with great interest.
Okay, if anybody has a last question, then please indicate in the chat now. Otherwise, I think we've put you through enough, Ben and Moushumi. So thank you very, very much. That was certainly one of the most interesting talks we've ever had. So yeah, thank you very much, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.